However, if someone were to watch my interview with Ken after he's the Mr. Beast of data science in a few years, and he has 100 million subscribers, and they'll still learn a lot, I'm sure, about your process through your initial days, right? Even if they discover it later on. So that's how I look at it, and it's always been a service to the community for me. So I made an explicit decision never to monetize this. I've turned down respectfully all of the offers that were made, and I try to reflect that whenever I try to contact anyone. So it's just me trying to invite my heroes with the sincere request to share their journey with all of learners like me who want to follow their path and would like to get their perspective.
Hello everyone, Ken here, back with another awesome interview for you. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Sanyam Bhutani. He is an ML engineer and AI content creator at H2O.ai. He's also an Inc. 42 Economic Times recognized machine learning practitioner. Sanyam is a one-time Kaggle master and two-time Kaggle expert, and he's ranked globally in the top 1% on the platform. He's also an active AI blogger on Medium and Hackernoon with over 1 million plus views overall. Sanyam is the host of the Chai Time Data Science podcast, where he interviews top practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers. The podcast has been streamed for over 40,000 hours across 110 plus countries for a total of 120,000 plus listens. I have a link to his podcast and the episode that I did with him below in the description and in the pinned comment. Definitely check that out after our conversation here. Now, on to the interview. All right, Sanyam, thank you so much for coming on my channel today. You have such an interesting background, especially when entering into data science and also with your podcast. So I've obviously mentioned your podcast in the intro a little bit, but I'd love to hear more from your perspective. One, about how you got into the field of data science, how you got interested in data science in the first place, and where that's taken you from there.
Sure, but before that, thanks again, Ken. As I mentioned in our conversations, I've watched almost all of your videos and really enjoyed them. So it's a privilege to be on the other side of the screen as well.
Well,
Thanks for the
absolutely.
opportunity.
And, I was just very recently on your podcast. So whichever one of these comes out first, I'm sure we'll link to both of them and make sure if you're interested in hearing, Sanyam's interview style or some of the types of questions, some of the best questions I've ever been asked in a podcast, actually. So definitely check that out after this video.
I hope so. Although I think you're being too kind, I drink chai and ask a lot of stupid questions. That's how I look at the podcast, but I think we'll keep debating, so I'll skip that. Going back to your question, how I got started in data science. So I'll maybe give a bit context. I started in this field while being in university in India. We like to call it college. Some people call it school, so call it whatever you want. I joined a computer science undergraduate degree expecting to get into the world of software. I was always inclined towards this standard nerd geek story, and it was a letdown. I was expecting to learn so many things. The course didn't live up to the expectations. So I decided, instead of me complaining with my friends every evening over chai of how ridiculous the syllabus is, I could keep complaining or try to fix in the gaps. So I tried joining. We had a lot of student clubs, fortunately, in my university, and I joined all of them one by one, just trying to figure out what's really interesting. Hey, I've seen a lot of hackers on TV. Why not try that terminal thingy that happens, typing code really fast, see what way that leads me to. Eventually, after joining a few clubs, switching through them, I was offered leadership of these because the teams were doing really well. And that wasn't interesting to me because I didn't want to be leading a group of people. I wanted to learn from them. And just going through that cycle, I discovered deep learning and machine learning. So that was the first time I heard of these topics. And I asked my advisors, can I try this topic? Almost universally, I was told, and this was around 2015, 2016, that's a topic for masters or PhD students. Please stay away from that. You should learn algorithms and all that stuff. I was like, all right, let me try deep learning then. I accept the challenge. So that's how I started. That's a long story, but that was a broad start.
That's awesome. Well, I really want to highlight a couple of things about that story. One thing that I think a lot of students are scared to do is to join clubs or to get involved at school. Those are some of the best places to experiment with new technologies, experiment with different things in a very low pressure environment. Everyone else is a student, everyone else is also learning. And these things can lead to incredibly valuable opportunities. In my interview with Tina Huang, her best practical work experience came through one of the clubs she joined at school. So she was able to get a consulting job or like a pro bono consulting client through, I think it was the consulting club, and she picked up all the data science, data analytics activities, and that was the number one thing people asked for during her interview process. So turning that to you, it's like you joined multiple of these, you experimented, and I really really like um, that process and that kind of openness to trying new things. I also love uh, your willingness to be challenged, you not necessarily going with the grain, because that's a very important thing with data science, right? As a data scientist, you have to ask tough questions. You have to want to solve problems, even if you're told, hey, things are done a certain way all the time. You want to give a little bit of pushback occasionally because a lot of the times they can be done better.
Completely agree with you. And this is not to mention that, hey, I learned a lot. Of course, at an undergrad level, you wouldn't learn a lot. But if you have a slight head start ahead of your peers, you're not going to learn from them. So, just to mention a few of the groups, we were working on autonomous underwater vehicles, so like a submarine, and we competed in these clubs. We won a few competitions in the international level. The thing about these clubs is you get outside of interacting with people on these teams that really have all this figured out. You get to learn from them. You also get to meet other competitors. For example, if you're working with a team that competes at some level, so you get all of that exposure, which is somewhat counterintuitive if you just stay within a campus, assuming there's no pandemic happening.
Yes. Well, one thing you mentioned there quite a bit was competition. And I know that you're quite active on Kaggle. I know that you're a one-time Kaggle master, and I think two-time Kaggle expert. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
So
correct.
it's in probably in the top percent of all Kaggle users. Tell me about how you got involved with that, how you ended up learning those skills. And we've talked a lot about, okay, finding the opportunities, finding the interest, but what practical steps did you take when getting started there?
Sure. So all of this, like I said, there's no smart planning around it. It was just brute forcing my way around everything. I discovered Kaggle through the world's best deep learning course called Fast.ai. I'm biased, but it is what it
It
is.
is incredible. I've taken it as well. One of my favorites, if not my
So
favorite deep learning.
in one of the lectures, Jeremy Howard mentioned that you should try Kaggle. I'm like, okay, let me check out the website. And I had seen it earlier. And to be completely honest with you, I had deleted my profile because I did so poorly. I recreated my profile, started there, failed miserably on the first competition. And also, I like to be honest that reaching top 1% in the rankings isn't that difficult. If you're active in 2 or 3 competitions and you do really well, you get higher in the rankings. And that's just to point out that not many people even compete actively. So it takes some amount of tenacity. But honestly, I just signed up on the website. I was working on a few computer vision projects at that time. So I saw computer vision Kaggle competition. I thought to myself, why not give it a try? And basically how I got started there.
Awesome. Well, I'm hearing a lot of kind of why not speak, right? Which I think is really good. If you're thinking about, hey, the upsides are I do really well and this looks really, really strong for me, and the downside is maybe I don't place that well. Um, I think that's something that's a very acceptable trade-off in pretty much every scenario. A lot of people get really wrapped up in, oh, if I don't do well, it's the end of the world, and no, you just move on to the next thing. Everyone in data science, I think, fails quite a bit. Data science is not a field where you're always met with success because usually your hypothesis around what data is going to do, how it's shaped, whatever that might be, is wrong. But you learn a lot in the process, and you eventually come to a good solution.
That's the essence of gradient descending into the right path or even trajectory of life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so tell me a little bit more about how you got started with content creation. So I know that you're quite well known again for your podcast. I think you've done quite a good amount of blogging as well, correct? Um,
That's correct.
and I'm always interested in how you first got interested in doing that, and also, um, for someone who is looking to get started, what's the first step there?
I think this will again link back to the why not factor, but it's also naiveness to be able to just give it things a shot, I guess. And you're really nervous as an undergrad while trying these things out. Oh, what will people think of me? What was really relieving to me was the thought that, and this might sound too smart. If it does, please call me out on that. But the thought that, hey, I'm gonna be in this field for at least, I hope so, 20, 30 years. If I spend the next 1 year or if I spend the next 2 years trying something that at that point is of interest to me, might as well enjoy it, might as well have fun. So that's why I was trying literally anything that I would enjoy. Now going back to your question, in Fast AI again, they really encourage writing a blog post about things you have learned in the last week. I was reading a lot of posts, I was learning a lot. I had taken a bunch of online courses and they were talking about things like fast RCNN. Now these are very smartly written, but I can't see myself writing that. How could I possibly write that? And here's one of the best teachers I know. He's telling me to write something I learned in the last week. I could do that. So my first blog post was literally ELI 5 to a CNN model. And in the second lecture, Jeremy shared the write up. Hey, here's a write up on CNNs. Tell me if there's a bigger motivator than that you write a post and your teacher shares it with your class.
Oh my
So
goodness, that is
that
awesome.
snowballed everything. That's how I got started, broadly speaking.
Well, honestly, that's fairly similar to how I got started on YouTube. Is that my first video that I had made for class as a class presentation? Um, I just put it out there and I got some initial traction. I got a couple hundred people had watched it, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, people are watching this," and you're immediately validated. And the thing is that you can't get validated unless you share your work or you're willing to put it out there. Um, and I also think that I really like Jeremy's advice is to write blog posts about this. That helps you to digest and understand what you've learned, but it also gets you in the habit of sharing. And people don't realize that you don't have to be an expert to write a blog post. If you look at the majority of the content on YouTube, it's not from experts, it's people that are sharing their experience. And
Correct.
so someone can learn from my experience if I'm only a month ahead of them learning data science or 2 weeks ahead of them. I just learned the skill. If it's fresh in my mind, I might be able to teach it more clearly than someone who's even an expert in it because I just wrestled through this problem. So that's something I think is incredibly valuable. And I've read some of your blog posts, and it's a thing. I'm glad you got that early motivation. I'm glad you stuck with it because they're quite good and quite informative.
I was having a lot of fun. I'm sorry to interrupt you, and just wanted to mention that's how to me naturally things appear, right? Even with your initiative with the 66 days of data science, you could be 66 days ahead of someone, and you could know something more than them, and you could help them in their journey. To me, that's also rewarding if you're able to help others and if they get some value through what you share. That's also amazing to me.
Well, yeah, honestly, Sanyam, that seems like it's been a characteristic of your entire journey so far. You're joining these clubs, you're trying to learn from other people, but in that process, in that community, by nature, you're also helping other people. You guys are competing in these competitions, I assume, as a group, um, and you're lifting everyone up together. A blog is your podcast, you're talking with some pretty incredible people, and you're sharing that message with a broader community, and I really like that. I would hope that I do some similar things. where I try and bring people together. I try and share a message. That might not always be the case, but you never know. So one thing you mentioned to me before we started the conversation here was that you were actually doing some contracting for data science while you were in college. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. And just want to say that you being too humble, I think I learn a lot through your interviews. I learn a lot of how I can improve my videos. And we've been talking about this. We, as a small community of content creators, really learn from each other's processes and just try to improve each other. So that's happening there as well, right? Already.
Absolutely.
So coming back to your question, like I said, I was interested in doing projects. The projects that were shared in my university were not so fun looking to me at that point, and I was just in my sophomore year. So ideally, internships and projects are kept out of reach of people up until they're in the final year of studies, right? So I went to the internet trying all of these courses, joined a lot of Slack communities. Now I'm just talking to people. Hey, I want to work on computer vision projects related to edge detection. I know these techniques. What can I do? And I'd have all of these discussions on Kaggle, off Kaggle, in communities, just talking to people, getting ideas, building projects in my free time, writing posts. And at one point in time, someone was asking a question and I was answering to their questions in a natural format like you're supposed to in a community, and they offered me to pay for it. What? So that's how I got started. There wasn't a planned process around it. I was just having fun, and that again caused a chain reaction. I again thought, why not? I was going to do it anyways. If you want to pay me for it, might as well do it in a better format. And they really like my work. So my first in freelancing we call client. My first client was also a repeat client. They recommended me to other people. Learned a lot through that process. Met a lot of people, and that continued throughout throughout since my sophomore year. So you weren't allowed to have a job, but they're fine with you freelancing at
Freelancing.
that time.
That's awesome. Well, you know, what you just hit on is something that I try to articulate through I guess it's like a metaphor, or maybe it's more of a simile. It's like gravity, right? So the more people you talk with, the bigger your network is, the larger your body of work is, the higher chance it is that opportunities come your way. And if you're thinking about it, you're aggregating all of this network, and you're creating this giant mass. And the bigger the mass is, the more gravity it has, just like a planet, right? And so, you know, a lot of people ask me, oh, how do I land this? How do I get our first client, my first contracting client? That's probably one of the hardest things to do. And honestly, it's difficult, but it's not as hard as you think if you've done a lot of the work to get to that point. Nothing happens overnight,
Yeah.
but if you're putting in constant work meeting people, you're putting in constant work building projects, putting in constant work showing what you've done, it gets a lot easier to find people that would be willing to pay you for this work, because they've heard of you from another client, they've heard of you from these other people, they've seen your face in these communities. um, and yes, maybe that, if you put it that way, where you have to communicate with a lot of people, it sounds like a lot of work, but doing a little bit of that every day is really not that overwhelming. And I will say something. I think you're one of the best at doing that type of networking, the kind of delicate touches, and making sure that you're involved in the conversation. I think that's something everyone can learn from.
Again, you being too kind. I think we all learn all of this through a process. And call so for some people and even me, networking isn't the right word, right? Why would I sit down and just spam people, try to talk to them? So if I were to rephrase that, which is also networking technically speaking, who wouldn't want the dopamine release of very smart insights from different people, right? Who wouldn't want to have conversations every day on some community? I hang out a lot on the fast A forums where things are constantly being shared. Who wouldn't want to learn new things or new techniques that are being shared? And as you're interacting, as you're answering questions, people are getting to know you, and they also note that, hey, this guy is also interested. you are somewhat networking with them, but actually it's just a conversation you're having about things you love.
I love that. And, I would argue the other side that all networking should be a conversation. Like, maybe it's the nomenclature is wrong, but if I'm reaching out to someone because I'd like to get to know them better, or maybe even if I want something from them, I have to make it interesting for them, or else neither of us are going to get what we want. So
Totally.
it's really important to say, hey, like, what value can I create for this other person? What is interesting about me that I can share? What knowledge can I give to them so that they would also be willing to share their knowledge or whatever that might be with me?
And it,
Go ahead.
sorry,
No, no.
it can also be a one-sided learning, right? So I'm sure many people would ask you, hey, can you mentor me? And if they were to go an extra mile, and if you ask good questions to really smart people like Ken, they are bound to answer. As far as I know, they cannot resist answering good questions. So if you do your homework and ask good questions, as far as I know, people really answer you. And
Yeah.
that is mentoring, but you're not putting it like that, which sounds like work, but it isn't.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that mentorship or any of these relationships starts with a couple small steps, and asking someone a very specific question based on knowing their background, knowing their experience. In my case, having watched a lot of my videos and saying, okay, I don't think he's covered this. I've watched, some of his videos, and maybe this question is very specific to me and my situation, and he obviously hasn't gone into that. That shows that, one, they've done their homework, and they put in the effort to warrant the effort in return. And if you are looking for mentorship, you are looking for some of these things, that is a slow courtship. That's something where, you ask a question here, maybe you ask another one in a couple weeks. It's a slow kind of pull, and then, you know maybe you guys end up being friends, and they're happy. They offer it or something like that. There's been a couple people that, I wouldn't say that I've truly mentored, but they have closer lines of communication to me, than my public ones, and I'm very comfortable with them asking me questions because they've shown that they're willing to participate. They're willing to be an admin on Discord servers, or they're willing to go a little bit extra mile, and they've offered these things. So that give and take, that relationship aspect, is something that I really cannot stress enough. Very, very, very similar to dating.
I read this the other day from Helena Sarens. She's one of the best AI artists. There are no stupid questions. There are only lazy questions.
I like that. I tend to agree. I tend to agree. I always welcome curiosity, and I think that a lot of questions that kind of sound stupid or obvious aren't, because they're thinking more broadly. But the questions that are where you can Google the answer, those are lazy questions, just as you had said. um, so I really want to turn this a bit more towards your podcast. So Try Time Data Science. Um, where does your passion for chai tea come from?
So I come from a small town near the foothills, and if you've been in any such place, you'd know this. You're bound to have a lot of chai throughout the day. This is my fourth cup of the day, so not too much for today. But
Is there caffeine in chai or no?
I've never looked at it because just that I don't have to deal with the anxiety of that. So let's, for the
Okay,
benefit
yeah,
of now, let's say no.
we'll forget it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where that love comes from. And by the time I started the podcast, I already had some interest in data science. Not to say that I was a good data scientist. I'm not. I don't call myself a data scientist. I'd still say I'm an enthusiast. I had started with the blogs. I had started a interview series where I would interview my Kaggle heroes or my heroes in general. After a point, this felt like I was asking them to write a blog post for me. And no one said this. No one even ever got mad. They were really happy to do it. But I didn't like the one-sided aspect of it, that I'd just send them questions, they'd write back answers. And it's not really interactive, because after I read their answers, I'd be like, oh, I wish I could have asked them this as well. So I stopped that, and Luckily, I got an invite to the Google AI residency. I made it to the final rounds of interviews. I failed them, but I continued my freelance work. So I was somewhat settled in freelancing, working with a lot of Bay Area startups. Overnight, I had this idea, hey, let me try a podcast. And in just a matter of few days, I quit all of my contracts, started the podcast just because I wanted to. Why not? Might as well try it again. Saying the same words, but that's how it got started.
That's awesome. And so one thing I think that you've had to do very effectively is to get guests on the show. How do you go about approaching new people? What is your approach for getting someone to come on and have a conversation with you? I think that's something, we'll still call it networking, but that's something that people can really learn from is that, hey, there's a person I really want to talk to. I want to get some of their time. What's a really positive way to get their attention and get them interested in participating and having a conversation with you?
Sure. So to give some more context to people, the podcasts or the interviews that I did earlier were interviews with my machine learning heroes, where I talk about their journey into the field and their work. I think in with content, everyone has their own space of what they contribute to. So I think of technical content as having a boundary, right? You wouldn't want it to get so technical that the other person would just want to read a book. And there's also a human side of it. So I like staying on the other side of the boundary, and I also think a lot about creating content that has a lifespan. So if I were, and I had written a lot of tutorials on PyTorch 0.4. Now those didn't stand the test of time. However, if someone were to watch my interview with Ken after he's the Mr. Beast of data science in a few years, and he has 100 million subscribers, and they'll still learn a lot, I'm sure, about your process through your initial days, right? Even if they discover it later on. So that's how I look at it, and it's always been a service to the community for me. So I made an explicit decision never to monetize this. I've turned down respectfully all of the offers that were made, and I try to reflect that whenever I try to contact anyone. So it's just me trying to invite my heroes with the sincere request to share their journey with all of learners like me who want to follow their path and would like to get their perspective. And people who have made it to the ranks, people like you who I get to interview, they usually share so many interesting insights that I hope people enjoy a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I've only heard good things about your podcast and your YouTube channel today. So,
I hope
um,
so.
so you stick to a pretty rigorous upload schedule. If I recall, it's every Tuesday and Thursday, correct?
It's every Thursday and Sunday. Again, that was
Thursday,
a spur
Sunday.
of
Sorry.
the that was a spur of the moment thing. I announced the podcast and I gave myself 3 weeks to release the first episode. And I just said, okay, you can expect new episodes every Thursday and Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific. All right. I said it. After that, I got a great job at H2O.A. I guess we'll talk about this. So for a bit, I didn't keep up with the schedule. In 2020, I started with it. And as a good hobby or as a good measure to having no remaining life, I decided to keep up the release schedule as a challenge to myself, at least for this year. So just trying to follow that.
Awesome. Well, so you do a lot. You've been doing the contracting. You're in all these clubs. You seem to get a lot done. Frankly, do you have any tips on for someone watching just how to stay motivated, how to stay efficient with your time, how to be as effective as you are in this space in producing content or whatever it might be?
I think it's funny. I like to think I'm very unproductive, and I keep coming up with ways on how to improve that. So I might be the wrong person to answer this. To me, everything is interest driven. As long as I have interest in something, I don't care how much time it takes, how much effort it takes, whatever it takes. So that's my key motivator of doing things, and that's how I keep chasing things. Right now, I get to work at a company that is one of the best in its domain, and I really enjoy my work there. I really enjoy the podcast. I get to meet people like you almost every day. So as long as I'm having fun, I don't need to come up with a schedule or any arranging of things. It's just random, totally speaking. Honestly speaking.
Very cool. Well, so you brought up your new work, and H2O.ai is it's focused on AutoML. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's Auto ML plus beyond that as well. So we're building a lot of products outside of Auto ML that aren't replacing the human, but also they are designed to help democratize AI, as we like to call the company's goal.
Very cool. And so, what is if I understand correctly, your role there is also very focused on content. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? How that came to be?
Sure. So I'm almost about to hit my 1 year work anniversary. So that's great. Hopefully they like my work. There's a good amount of overlap. I like to interview a lot of Kaggle grandmasters. Luckily at H2O we have, I think at this point 18, might increase by the time this interview goes out. So I get to interview them. So the podcast has a good overlap with work, which is really nice. Apart from that, again, there's a lot of freedom. It's a startup, but we have a culture called Makers Gonna Make, which essentially gives us complete freedom of, hey, if it's of interest to you, you can build that, as long as it's not too out of the blue, right? So right now I'm on the content side. I'm also working on a course that's being co-taught with a few grandmasters. So literally the former number one on Kaggle competitions taught a lecture the last week,
That's
and
awesome.
that's just amazing that being able to work with such people and learn from them at work. I used to think that you have to learn up until a point and then you get a job, and in hindsight you learn so much more after you get into the industry. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's the very typical. You learn more when it's applied. You know, you learn more when doing a project than when taking a course for the most part. And then you learn more when you get a job than you did from the projects for the most part. Or you're forced to learn, you're forced to adapt constantly.
This is
So
why it has to be fun. Sorry to
exactly. No, no, you're fine. You're fine. This is your interview. You're welcome to interrupt me anytime you want. So, you know, you've done you know, your focus is a lot on content these days. You're doing a podcast, you're doing your work with H2O.ai, and you're also doing YouTube content as well. So, what have you learned from this whole process? And also, you were telling me about some YouTube bad practices that you have, and I'd like to drill down into why you're still doing this.
Sure. I'd maybe start with the bad practices. So the
Okay.
first time I interacted with Ken, for the audience, he, after you reach a stage where Ken is at, right, you get a very good understanding of how things work and audience. You almost have it, I'm trying to think of the word, a disproportionate understanding of how content or content consumption works. So Ken's first reaction was, why don't you chop these up into smaller portions and upload them on YouTube so that people can enjoy them? I'm not doing that. I'm not writing blog posts around them. So for context, my blog had hit a 1 million views mark, after which I passively started writing. I basically gave it up because that's the biggest number I could imagine. That's the biggest number at least I've seen in any of my accounts. So I don't write any blog post connected with my podcast, which I could have used to accelerate, because as my goal, since it's non-monetized, is just to make sure that these stories reach maximum people. I don't do that. So this is a complete independent process of any of my other tasks. And the reason for that to me is I really want to understand how to get better at this. I don't think I can be good even in 1 year at podcasting. And I don't want to be the best podcaster. I want to be a good data scientist who also knows how to podcast. So if I start with a smaller community and really improve on that, I still get very critical feedback every day. And that's only possible as long as it's a smaller community. And to me, it's more important that I do the interviews properly than push out more content that reaches more people. So the core needs to be tight, intact. And that's what I'm trying. And that's only so much is possible with the release schedule. So that's why I'm not practicing uh, things that will help better reach.
That makes sense. You know, I'm a big believer in, well, one book that has really changed my life is called The One Thing. And the idea is that you really want to focus on uh, problems in your life like dominoes rather than like an agile process. Agile, you're working on multiple modules at the same time and you're combining them at the end. Um, Dominoes, you're knocking one over at a time. And the crazy thing, a fact about dominoes that a lot of people don't know is that if you knock one domino falling down can knock over another domino that's 1.5 times its size. So if you knock down 20 dominoes, each of them, or maybe it's like 50 dominoes, each of them 1.5 times bigger, the 20th domino or the 50th domino would be like the size of the moon, right? So you can
Yeah.
accomplish incredible things if you're taking these slightly larger steps, but doing things sequentially. Again, in software development, that does not work, but in accomplishing your goals, I think it really does. And so I really do believe that it's worthwhile to take the time to, again, like I will never master YouTube, but I can always try to improve and try to focus on this linearly until I reach a mass that I'm comfortable with, where I feel like, okay, I can maybe take the gas off. And I completely respect that you're doing that with the podcast and also with YouTube. I think that that's a very, very good and well thought out
Thank you.
approach to take. Sorry.
Just wanted to mention, even with software engineering or programming in general, I think it's true to some extent. So to me, to give an example, the first time I installed CUDA on a mainframe, it took me around 3 or 4 days to get that done. Now it's gotten better as well, but you also get a hang of things. So many things are repetitive, even with data science. Not all of them, but quite a lot. And with time, it compounds, right? So first time you sit down to do something, you're gonna feel like an idiot, especially for me, because I work at a company where we have so many grandmasters. You will feel really slow compared to other people, and that's a part of the community. I think it really motivates you to get better at things. So you have to sit down, face the computer for hours and feel like a complete idiot when starting out, and eventually things will get better, I think.
Yeah. Well, the way that I think you have to approach it is like a challenge
Yeah.
or like a very incremental growing stage. And one of the things that I really like about the 66 days of data challenge that I've started is that every day you're tracking what you're doing. So you can see your growth compared to yourself. I mean, you can't ever compare yourself to other people, especially in this space. Some people learn quicker, some people learn slower. Some people have just different experiences that are more relevant. I think someone with a software engineering background switching into data science is probably going to pick it up quicker than someone who is coming from, a marketing background, just because the coding in that area is going to be a lot easier to pick up. And so someone, that marketing person is going to say, hey, he learned it so much faster, I'm an idiot. And it's like, no, this guy, although they're new to data science, their skill set was a little bit more parallel, and that made it easier for them to
Absolutely.
understand. So remember, everyone, measure yourself, measure your skills against your own skills from a week, a month, a year ago.
Consistency is key. I read this in a blog post of a friend of mine, Francisco Ingham. He said these amazing words. I'm not sure if he wrote them, but either in software programming or even in deep learning, either you stay at it, get better, or you give up. There's no other way around it, right? It's an iterative process.
Yeah. Well, I recently had an interview with Jeremy Harris, a mutual friend of ours, and he said something about entrepreneurship and data science that I thought was interesting, and it was in essence, you only can't do it if you give up. So everyone that is willing to stick with it will succeed in either entrepreneurship or data science. And I think that that's hard to believe, but it's also true. Um,
It's and I think I would think to myself that, hey, I can only do this for so long. That's a part of the process. If you're going to run it for longer, you'll have to come up with better ideas. I'm sure can you critique yourself a lot and come up with ideas. And if you have to do that, that's a part of the learning process. You need to innovate as well. So even with content creation, it's a constant cycle. And I forgot to answer your question, but going back to your original question, how has this helped me? So I follow crazy schedule with the release. It's maybe not as crazy. I know you put out a lot more content, so I'm not as smart and as talented as you. But
I don't know
one
about
thing,
that, but
you're being kind. I think one thing I've learned is how to schedule things better. So there are a few external factors in what I do, which is making sure that someone else is there on the call, or all of the processes that happen behind the scenes. No one needs to know, and they don't have to. But making sure I have them figured out, which has made me a better uh, person or a better planner in general. And apart from that as well, just having conversations with all of these great people opens you up to different dimensions or different possibilities. We need a lot more diversity in data science or even in tech. And to me, that's been helpful since I'm the closest person to all of the content. I'm not sure if anyone has listened to all of the episodes. If they have, I'm very grateful. But I'm the person that has been through all of the conversations. So I personally, I've learned a lot.
that's awesome. I selfishly learned quite a lot from speaking with people like yourself, speaking, you know, anyone I have a conversation with. I hope I learn, or at least make a conceited effort to learn something. And you know, I I would say that that's probably pretty good advice to everyone, is that every conversation you have, every situation you're in, try and take something away from it that's positive. And you know, maybe it's something, hey, I don't want to act like that person when I'm in public or something like that, but still, you're learning something that can be constructive. So those are all of my main questions. Are, you know, at the end of the interview, I always give the floor to the person that I'm interviewing. They can talk about any of the initiatives they have, what the future of their platforms are. And I'd love to turn this over to you to talk about whatever you want.
That's great. I don't have a lot of things going on. Just I have a podcast called Chai Time Data Science. If you'd like to hear from people like Ken on the podcast, you can check it out. Apart from that, I'm at my work. There's an overlap, but I'm also teaching a course called Machine Learning Foundations. I think I'll send over the link to you if anyone wants to join that. I do all of these efforts as non-monetized. So the course as well as the podcast is non-monetized. It's completely free of cost. Apart from that, for the audience, I hope you keep watching Ken's videos. I've learned a lot through them. I've gotten a lot of value out of them, and Ken has told me a lot of interesting plans for the future. So I'm sure everyone will get a lot of value out of these.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on. I will leave all of your links for people how to get involved with the podcast, your Twitter, anything else you'd like me to share in the description, and also pinned in the first comment.
That's perfect. Thanks again, Ken, for having me on, and thank you for your content. Honestly, I've really enjoyed it. I've said it multiple times, but I can't stress enough that we really need more perspectives in the field, and we really need people to simplify things down or share these advices that are still underrated in the community.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming on. I think I can turn around and say almost the exact same thing to you. So